Hello, everyone, and welcome. Excited to have you today as we welcome Deborah Evans from Luminate Communications. She brings to us a wealth of knowledge, especially when it comes to storytelling. So she is going to help us discover how powerful human-centered storytelling can build trust and deepen donor connections, which will inspire lasting generosity, which is really the whole goal of Do More 24 Delaware. So we're excited to have her, and she is coming to us from Toronto, Canada. She works with some amazing organizations in Canada as well as here in the United States. So I'm excited to have her bring a little different perspective to us today. So please welcome Deborah.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. Someone just confirm for me they can see that.
Looks good.
Okay, thank you. You never know sometimes with um, Zoom. Okay, so welcome everyone. I am Deborah Evans, and this is Mastering Storytelling, Creating Impressions to Maximize Fundraising Impact. We only have about 45 minutes together, so I'm going to jump right in. I like to start with a little bit about me. So I am a former journalist. I spent 6 years as a general assignment reporter before moving into nonprofit communications. I'm actually an accidental entrepreneur because I got laid off from that nonprofit communications job while on parental leave. I had three choices at the time: mope about, find a new job, or carve my own path. So I chose the more difficult of the three. And here I am over 15 years later running an award winning agency. I'm a passionate storyteller, and telling great stories for nonprofits is at the heart of what I do. Because at the end of the day, only one person is reading your content at a time. So it needs to make a meaningful connection with them so that it triggers action. But quite frankly, I don't believe we need to be all headshots and resumes around here. So I am also a mom of two teens. One is studying engineering at university, and the other is still in high school. And let me tell you, I have spent more parenting hours than I care to count standing around cold hockey rinks, watching them both play a lot of hockey. I'm a runner. I have run over 2 dozen races at the 5K, 10K, and half marathon distance. I didn't say I was fast. I said I love it. There is a difference. And finally, I will never say no to a cup of coffee. So now that you know a little bit about me, let me tell you a little bit about Luminate. We are an award winning marketing agency that creates the content nonprofits need to better connect with their audience. We use our creativity, skills, and expertise to amplify voices, strengthen efforts, and do good. It's our way of helping to build a better world. So, what does that mean? Well, it means communication strategies, brand positioning, and execution of all types of fundraising and communication materials. That's impact reports, annual reports, blogs, newsletters, direct mail appeal letters, social media, websites, and so much more. And in everything we do, we infuse the art of storytelling because your fundraising efforts depend on it, which is where we are going now. The art of storytelling is fundamental to fundraising success. I'm going to say that one more time. The art of storytelling is fundamental to fundraising success. And why is that? Because when it comes to talking about the very people who are donating to your organization, when they decide to stop donating, after financial reasons, there are two main reasons that they give. They are, I no longer felt connected to your organization, or I did not trust that my donation was used wisely. Now, those are two statements that nobody wants to hear. This is true of all generations of donors. 11% of Gen Z donors have said this is their reason for leaving. Now, that is not a huge percentage. But for most of you, I'm also guessing that Gen Z doesn't make up a huge percentage of your overall donors. So let's take a look at the rest of the generations. 26% of millennials said this, 24% of Gen X has said this, and a whopping 36% of baby boomers have said this. So, are you willing to lose that many donors because they don't trust that their dollars are being used to do what you promised? So, what's the solution? More than data to trust that their donations were used wisely, donors want to hear the compelling impact stories of your organization, your clients, and your team. They don't want to always be asked for money. Sometimes they just want to know how their money was spent before they give again. And they want to see the impact of your work, not just the data of your work. And that's because transparency equals trust. So, to bring back that same generational giving data report that we just looked at, approximately 68% of baby boomer donors are subscribed to a nonprofit's email newsletter. And what they are most excited to read about is program updates and beneficiary stories. 65% of Gen X donors are subscribed to a nonprofit's email news list, and they are most excited to read about program updates and beneficiary stories. 60% of owners in the millennial donors are subscribed to a nonprofit's email list, and they are most excited to read about program updates and beneficiary stories. And finally, Gen Z, 52% of them are subscribed to nonprofits' email lists. And I bet you can guess what they are most excited to read about. Program updates and beneficiary stories. So aside from the fact that email communication reaches over half of your donors on a regular basis, so if you're not engaging it consistently, maybe it's time to consider it. What they want to read about is the impact you're making so that they can see how their donation is making a difference. Stories. That's what your donors have said they want to hear. So showcasing data just doesn't have the same effect. I'm going to give you an example. Let's say you are an organization that supports homeless and low-income people. And let's say 3,000 people a day access programs at your organization. This could be shelter, this could be food programs, this could be housing support, this could be mental health support, any type of programs, 3,000 people a day. What does that mean to you? Can you tangibly understand how many people 3,000 is? Let's break that down, try to figure it out. Most Broadway theaters in New York seat about 1,000 people. That feels like a lot, but that is not even close. That's only a third of the people that this organization serves. What about a busy Costco on a weekend? My gosh, that feels crowded, but that's only about 300 or 400 people an hour. So that is not 3,000 people at all. All right, so now what about, let's think bigger. Hockey. My kids play a lot of hockey. The average NHL arena, well, that seats about 18,000 people. So now we've overshot it. So what does 3,000 people look like? Have we figured it out yet? And what are they doing every day at this organization? So, like I said, the average person can't wrap their head around a number and what said programs mean to an individual. So let's take that same organization and say they write a client story about a woman who came to their shelter after losing her home when she was paying her share of rent to her roommate without realizing that her roommate wasn't paying the rent and they got evicted. So now she ends up in their emergency shelter. And the story continues to share about the services she benefited from at the shelter, including their transitional housing program, which helped her get into an affordable one-bedroom apartment, allowing her to pursue her dream of going back to school. So now the reader can visualize how their money supported a specific person and how their money made a difference. And that's the power of storytelling that paints a visual of a real life struggle that your audience may never have experienced and that they simply can't see when you tell them 3,000 people were supported today. So donors have an easier time imagining smaller quantities versus larger ones. And one person's story can make a greater impact than larger numbers. Not saying not to use the larger numbers as part of the storytelling, but that one person becomes the vehicle for sharing larger numbers. And larger numbers can be anything. I use the number 3,000, but even if I use the number 82 people stayed at our shelter this year. Again, what does that mean? Have you ever been in a house with 82 people at the same time? Right? We don't understand. Our brains can't comprehend how many people that is and what it is they're doing. And it works in anything. It's not just people. This journey of one rescued shelter pup is more tangible than saying your organization, supports 100 dogs a month. The family of one sick kid getting cancer treatment means more to donors than thousands of patients receive care annually. All this to say, as I said, not that you should never use data when storytelling. It's important. It's just not the only driver of your story. So the key takeaway here is that crafting powerful narratives in fundraising and communications creates a community of donors ready to provide continued support. Say it another way, a donor's understanding of how their donation will be used is a powerful motivator for donors of any generation. This is true in both your communications and your fundraising material. In your fundraising materials, a powerful story will pull on the right heartstrings. Think of the best appeal letters you've ever received in your mailbox at the holidays. Storytelling in your communications is just as important because this is the time that donors get to see how you're spending their money and who you're spending their money on before they decide if they want to give you money again. Okay, so now we need to spend a little bit of time talking about how you get those stories and how to write those stories. This does work in video storytelling as well, but I'm going to focus mainly on the written, printed, digital, whatever, writing. Crafting powerful narratives is more than just showcasing a quick testimonial from someone saying thank you. It's about having a recipient of your services share their story. So this can be a sensitive area, and I'm not going to spend all that much time on that. I'll just say it doesn't matter who you serve and what you do. There are always people who want to show their gratitude by sharing their story. Here at Luminate, we've shared stories about families that have benefited from mental health services, individuals who have been in prison and are trying to rebuild their lives, women who fled to gender-based violence shelters, and families going through cancer treatment. Each of their stories show the audience behind the people behind the organization's mission, and it's just about telling their story with sensitivity and understanding. So, how do you get that story? Well, let's start with the basics. Once someone agrees to tell their story, the best way to get the information you need is to interview them. Rather than asking them to write something for you, by interviewing them, you're not only taking the pressure off of them to do any work, you're also making sure that you're tailoring your story to meet your organizational needs. Whether you're speaking to someone who is happy to tell you every detail or someone who is a little more guarded, there are key details you need to know in order to write an impactful story that meets your organizational purpose. So, before the interview, what you want to do is reflect on what you know about the person you're about to talk to and reflect on the story you want to tell. What do you want to achieve by sharing the story? What programs, events, campaigns, stats, or other details do you want this story to shed light on? And what action do you want your audience to take after reading the story? Because at the end of the day, We're talking about fundraising here. You want your audience to take action. I'm assuming you want them to donate, but maybe you want them to volunteer. Maybe you want them to advocate with you, right? What action do you want them to do? What do you want them to feel when they read, or if we're talking video, watch this story? So once you're doing the interview, you are going to follow the basic who, what, when, where, why, and how structure for your questions. So who? These are the basic facts about a person: name, age, job title, other relevant facts, anything like that. This is the bones of your story. What is their relationship to your organization? The answers to these questions are the bones of your story. I was reading the wrong side of the slide as I said that. They're the reason you're interviewing the storyteller. Where does the story take place? You want to get as many details as possible so you can show your reader rather than tell your reader. When does the story take place? A storyteller's experience rarely occurs in a single time frame. So you need to build a timeline when you're telling the story, but one that your readers can easily follow. And now my two favorite questions. Why? The answer to this question is the reason you're here. This simple word often gets to the heart of the story. And then how? Similar to why, it digs into the meaning rather than just the facts. The question, how have we, the organization, made a difference in your life, is a great way to tie an individual's story to your mission. So in a second, I'm going to go on and talk about, a few tips that make that whole process, the interview process, a little easier. And then we'll talk about writing a story. But I just want to pause for a second to see if anybody has any questions about anything I've talked about to date. No?
But is there a good time when you mention, it doesn't happen, the story doesn't typically happen in one session, in one, day for a client. It's also, is there an opportunity to get these stories as they're ongoing and just build them and keep going, or should we wait until we know we have a success story? Anything like that.
That's a great question. The short answer is no. You don't necessarily need to wait until you have a success story, because success can be defined in many different ways. And success is simply sometimes, arriving at the organization and taking the steps that are needed to, depending on what you do, change your life or change this or succeed at that. I'll give you a great example, actually. One of our clients is a gender-based violence shelter. And about 5 years ago, we did a success story with one of their former clients. She had recently moved out of the shelter. I can't remember, maybe just a few months earlier. She had come with her children. They provided not just shelter, but a lot of support, and then helped her and her two children find an apartment. And we did a success story with them soon after they had moved into their apartment. And she was so lovely and had only lovely things and positive things to say about how the organization had supported her. And that was the success story. 3 years later, we did another story about this same woman, because now she had this wonderful new job and her children were thriving in school. And she had met a wonderful new partner, and she had new successes she wanted to share, because her story didn't end the moment we shared her story. She had, I think if I remember correctly, she was even now working as a social worker, supporting other women who had been through, not at that organization, but at another one. And that was a new success story all over again. So a success story doesn't end the moment you share it. Success is however You and the storyteller choose to define it, and you can revisit it in the future. Any other questions, or should I move on?
Deborah,
All right.
really quick question. What do you think is the best way to find people to tell their stories, especially if, it might be more not confidential, but it might be it might be a hardship. It might be a hard story. How do you
Mhm.
suggest people find that person, and then get them to open up in that way? Because we're asking, it's basic, like who, what, when, where, why, but like, how do we get them to really open up and share those things?
That's a great question. So actually, I have a few slides on that coming up, but I will answer it as well to say, um, the easiest way to find that story, of course, is to just ask. But some of it is very difficult for people to tell, and they have to be comfortable. And a lot of the times when we ask, the first thing they'll say is, no, I'm not interested, right? Or they are willing, but they have some parameters. Confidentiality, I used the example of a gender-based violence shelter, which has a lot of confidentiality around it. And a lot of people, but we have told stories, numerous stories for that shelter. And there are ways to maintain someone's confidentiality while still telling their story and getting them to open up, but only to the point that they feel comfortable. Again, we are not trying to exploit their story. We're trying to use it as a vehicle to tell our story as the organization. So that's when they understand that, they know that they're going to be treated. They know that they can trust you to treat them well, is basically it. Let me go into to answer the other part of your question. Let me go into these next slides. And if you still have questions about how do we get them to open up, pop back in and ask away. Okay, so tips for conducting great interviews. As the last question just said, they're great. This is who, what, when, where, why, how, but it's a lot more complicated than that. And it's important to remember that as the interviewer, your job is to carefully draw out what you need to know, but we need to ensure that the person feels as comfortable as possible. So if they don't want to be on video, don't put them on video. If they don't want to share their name and they want to use a pseudonym, use a pseudonym. Your audience will understand, especially if we're talking about sensitive stories. If they want to share their name, but they don't want to share their picture, don't share their picture. It becomes as simple as that to a certain degree, because we want the storyteller to feel comfortable, but also confident. And actually, another great way is after you've written the story, or if it is on video, after you've edited it together, show them. Let them read it. Let them see it. Before you publish it anywhere, before you send it out, before the board reads it, let them see it. Make sure they feel comfortable and confident in how they're portrayed. And that's the best way to ensure that, they're happy with everything, and they are giving you, in a way, their blessing to move forward. Because after all, you're asking a stranger or a somewhat stranger to share maybe the hardest or most painful memories and moments of their life. So going into that interview, preparing a list of questions is helpful to ensure you don't miss any of the important details you want to learn. But when it's time, don't just jump immediately into interview mode. Remember, the interview process is not an interrogation. It's about having a meaningful conversation. So here are 5 tips that make that conversation a little bit easier. The first one is build trust by putting your interviewee at ease. So one of the best ways to start any interview is simply say, tell me a little bit about yourself. It's an uncomplicated conversation starter that sets the tone for an easygoing chat. They start talking, you listen, and ask follow-up questions where necessary. And here's another tip if we're talking about difficult conversations. If you know that they have an upsetting story or a difficult story to tell, start by reassuring them and say, I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable anyway. So if I ask you a question that you don't want to talk about, just say so and we'll move on. That's perfectly fine. And it makes them feel like they're driving this, not you. And again, they'll feel more comfortable and they'll feel safe. So the second tip is ask one question at a time. We often have questions that have A, B, and C to them. The problem is asking multi-part questions just results in them feeling very overwhelmed and then only giving you half an answer. So use something that's called mirroring tactics to check your understanding. So if they say something that you're not 100% clear on, just pause, interrupt them gently and say, so what you're saying is that correct? So this works not only to help you understand better and make sure you're clear, but it often prompts the storyteller to elaborate further and give you more details or make it clearer for you to understand. Tip number 4, listen more and talk less. It is human nature to want to fill silences. Don't. Embrace the awkward silence as the interviewee reflects and responds to your questions. You'll be amazed at what they have to say when they don't feel rushed. And here's another tip. Your follow-up questions, they don't come from your list. They come from listening. And finally, end with an open-ended question. The best way to end this conversation is to ask if there's anything else that they would like to add. It doesn't feel like a sophisticated question, but it's every bit as useful as the uncomplicated conversation starter. And again, it makes your storyteller feel comfortable and safe because they feel like they've said what they want to say and not only answered what you want to know. Before we move on to writing a story and how to write the story with all this information you've gathered so that it best serves your organization while still honoring the storyteller, I want to acknowledge that if you're not used to this interview process, it can feel a little daunting. So I've created a free downloadable guide that includes tips for making interviews easier, as well as sample questions and all that kind of stuff. So grab this QR code and download it. I'll put it back on the screen at the end of the presentation. So if you don't want it right now, if you don't want to feel rushed, that's kind of thing. So any other questions before we move on to writing the story that you have just gathered all the information for? Nope. All right. I can move on, but feel free to jump in if there's anything at all. Oops. There we go. Okay, so as I said, what is left is to write the story. Now, again, these interview techniques and the questions asking that I mentioned works in video as well. Here at Luminate Communications, we work primarily as writers. We partner with videographers when video storytelling is necessary. So everything that I'm sharing from here on in is about writing a story. But the bones of telling a story are the same if you choose to do it in video. So when writing, it's important to not get lost in the weeds of the person's story. Remember, we're using what they shared as a vehicle for your organization and to give greater understanding to your donors about the impact of your organization. So reflect on the story you want to tell, keep your organizational purpose in mind, and tell a story that is both easy for the readers to follow and achieves your end goals. And remember, you can do this in both fundraising pieces which you can see an example of here on the right, is a direct mail appeal letter, and communications pieces, which are the other two pieces. So here are the 4 key elements to an impactful story. Number 1 is character and context. So this is the backstory. Identifying the storyteller is the best place to start. Providing descriptors while maintaining client confidentiality when necessary allows your readers and donors to feel as though they deeply know the character in your story. So I'm going to give you an example by reading you one and breaking up the story. Reading it to you, this is an organization that we did a story for a few years ago. They work with pregnant teens and young moms. So the story starts. Nancy moved to the city soon after her daughter was born in 1989. She was 17, living with her partner's family, and knew no one else in the city. The couple also had an 18-month-old son. So the next part of the story is character or conflict or catalyst. So what is your storyteller struggling with? What happened in this person's life before they came to you? Letting your readers into the challenges your character is facing fosters that connection. So let's continue on with Nancy's story. Nancy said, "At that time in my life, I felt anxious and uncertain about myself, and I was isolated until I discovered Jesse's Center." So next is the goal phase. What is your storyteller working towards? The goal phase is the opportunity for your organization to show how they would help support your character as they achieve their goal, connecting your services to their success. So let's carry on with Nancy's story. Over the next year, she immersed herself in all that Jesse's Center had to offer. She took parenting classes to boost her confidence, occasionally stayed for meals to socialize with peers, benefited from the nursery until she received subsidized daycare spots, and worked with a counselor to apply for affordable housing. She said, having help finding basic things like daycare and housing was huge. Once you can count on those important pieces, everything else starts to fall into place. And it did. Through the Jesse's School program, she began working towards completing her high school diploma. She went on to get a bachelor's degree in psychology and a postgraduate certificate in human resources. And then finally, the change over time. How has your character's life changed? Letting your readers see how your programs and initiatives have supported someone's life is the impact that fosters that deeper connection, pardon me. So let's finish Nancy's story. Today, she is a senior compensation consultant at a large financial company. Her children are now 29 and 30, and in 2018, she decided to give back to the organization that gave her so much and returned to Jesse's as a board member. She said, "The services that Jesse's offers are fundamental. They give a foundation for mothers to provide their children with what they need to be healthy, while also providing themselves with what they need to do for their own futures." So that, in a nutshell, is how you help donors feel connected to your mission. It's about the people or the animals or the environment or whatever it is you serve. It's about connecting your donors' money to something tangible. So I'm just going to back up a few slides again. Oh, one too many. That picture on the left, that's Nancy and her 2 kids. So Nancy was agreed to share a picture with us, and it ran alongside her story, which really helped donors connect the dots of her as a teenager with 2 young children at the beginning of the story to the successful career she has now, which she credits in a large part to the services provided at the organization. So the thing about finding stories is you can find them anywhere. This organization found that story because Nancy became a board member and wanted to share what her experience from 20 years earlier or 30 years earlier, I guess it was. This grainy photo here, it went alongside another story that we worked on. It was also for a gender-based violence shelter, and it came to them. This is a photo of a mom and her two sons in the early 80s when they stayed at that shelter. And one of those boys, I'm not sure which one at the moment, reached out to that shelter when he found this photo after his mom passed away 5 years ago, and wanted to tell his story. So he came to them and wanted to share their story. And again, he was very happy to have this grainy photo published alongside it. So stories are not always about current clients and current people you support. Sometimes you can find them, well, just about anywhere you look, especially for organizations that have been around long enough. So let's wrap up. I want to leave a few minutes for questions. So a few key takeaways. Crafting powerful narratives creates a community of donors ready to provide continued support. It's important in your direct fundraising acts, but it's just as important in your indirect fundraising asks, in your communications, because when the donor feels a connection, they're more likely to give. I'm going to give you another quick example. We have a client that does an 8-page impact report every March. It's all about the impact of their programs and services on individuals and on the community. Nowhere in this report is there an ask for money. There is no direct call to action. It's all about showcasing impact on real people of dollars donated. Their donation data shows that their highest giving month is December, which is not unexpected, of course. Their second highest giving month is March. Even though the report doesn't ask for money, recipients of it feel connected enough to want to give again. Plain and simple, transparency equals trust. And crafting powerful narratives is more than showcasing just testimonials. But make sure when you tell a story that you don't get lost in the weeds. It needs to still serve your organizational purpose. So that's it for me. We still have a few minutes left if anybody has questions. I promised I would put that QR code back up for anybody who wants support with conducting interviews. So there it is. And there's also another QR in the bottom left. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm always happy to connect with anybody. Questions?
Deborah, what do you think about so incentivizing people to tell their story? Like, do you often find that you might have to give a donation or something, a stipend or something to help them to be eager to tell their story? Or how do you feel about that?
I don't have an opinion either way specifically. I think it really depends on what you do as an organization and the current situation or the current situation your storyteller is in, I guess is the best way to say it. So that answer would really vary on, who you are and what you do. I know some of our shelter clients will, do something as simple as provide the storyteller with, additional transportation, bus tickets or that kind of thing. Something as simple as that, so that if the telling of the story is not done in person, it's also not a hardship for them to come in and, have a conversation. Whether you want to make a donation on their behalf or as an organization or something like that, I think that's a very case by case basis. And again, it depends on your organization. So I'm not sure that's a very clear answer for you, because the answer at the end of the day is it depends.
Deborah, what do you think about I know we all have a donation button on our websites, but what about a storytelling button? So just like you had that one example of that son who came and reflected on what, his mother and the support that she received, being able to capture those types of stories.
Mhm. I think it's a great idea. Again, I'm going to say it depends on what you do. But I think it's a great idea. But if you have a large enough team where that could be designated to somebody, um, you have to be careful with having a button that says, tell us your story kind of thing, because as I said, you want to make sure the story tells your organizational purpose or it meets your goals, not just their goals. Obviously, we need to honor them. So if they're going to tell your story, if it's a form on your website where they can tell their story or something like that, you want to make sure that they can provide contact information and that they're willing to be contacted so that you're able to ask the questions that you need to ask rather than them sharing what they think is important to share. Does that make sense?
Yes, perfect.
And it's about getting into the details too. Someone might share their story, thank you, Jane Smith organization, now I have, I have a great housing living situation, and that's all they share. But now what you want to know is, how long did they come to you? Who did they work with? What programs did they participate in? How did that support them? What are they doing now with their life now that they have housing? That kind of stuff. Any other questions? Maybe I will stop share so we can all see each other.
Well, I would highly encourage all of you to reach out to Deborah, follow her on LinkedIn, follow her newsletter, some amazing resources that she has. Especially, I know a lot of you organizations right now on this call have some great stories to be sharing. So I encourage you to reach out to her and her team so she can help you share those stories. Especially as we're coming up on Do More 24 Delaware, 44 days. No one's counting except Tia and myself. But we're excited. I've dropped in, we have some great webinars and some additional marketing office hours. So if you're looking for additional support or please click on that link. If your organization has not completed the participation survey, please do that as well. I highly encourage you to continue to look at that marketing toolkit that United Way of Delaware and Spur Impact has provided everyone. Has a lot of great resources. A lot of what Deborah touched on today is built into that marketing toolkit. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Last thing I just wanted to throw out there, we are getting ready to send out the links for the live stream, for the 24-hour live stream. We will once again be doing that virtually as well as in person. This year we'll have 2 in-person spots, one at Chancery Market as in Wilmington and then in Lewis at the Rehoboth Beach Film Society. So I hope that you will be able to join us in person at one of those events this year. Some more information to be coming out about that, but we have some great partners that will be joining us at those events. But so again, Deborah, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your knowledge with everyone. And I hope to see everybody here on Thursday with Jessica from JC Collaboration. And we will talk to you soon. Have a great day.
Jen, I think someone
Thank
asked
you.
if we would be sending. Thank you so much, Deborah.
Thank you, Deborah.
One first. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation. Jen, someone asked